can we talk a little bit about the math behind the overview of what makes something a good asset? And we're going to get into what an asset manager is, but let's talk about the bones, because I think it is simple math, but I guess, is it always simple math, or is there something that you've seen along the way where it's a little bit more than simple math? But why don't
Yeah.
you kind of give us a little foundation and build on how things can get more complex?
Yeah. So just real quickly, as we were talking, I think when you're saying like terminology is important, and someone might be thinking, oh, well, he was in that role for, however long a day, you can pick up terminology so quick just by listening to podcasts, watching videos, reading books. So don't think you have to be in that environment to learn it. It's just put in your hours, listen, and you'll pick stuff up. So don't
Absolutely.
stress about that. In terms of math, honestly, in my opinion, I think people
Complicate.
overcomplicate the whole process. Honestly, it's really, did you buy the building cheap enough or not? And what happened in the future? People want to talk about, IRR is going to be the most difficult formula you do, but it's a really easy formula in Excel once you know how to set it up. And there's I'm not going to talk about it because there's 1,000 resources to find it online. You can just go, how do I calculate IRR? You can go figure it out. But it's basically the same thing as an annualized return, which is your total amount of profit divided by your equity divided by the number of years. It's just a little bit more sophisticated when it comes to how long it takes to hit your returns. But go look it up. You can learn it pretty quickly. It's, again, just like cap rate. It's not as intimidating as it sounds. But honestly, all we're really doing is just basic math, adding, subtracting, dividing, multiplying. But it's about getting the right information and plugging the information into areas that make sense. So it's, do you have the right number budgeted for, roof replacements? Do you have the right number budgeted for all your expense items? Do you have the right numbers budgeted for where you can push rents to if you're planning on it? Do you have your occupancy right? And a lot of it is just, were you conservative enough, right? If you think you can get the occupancy to 95% and stay there for 5 years, and you just hit the returns you're looking for, that's not as safe as the deal you underwrite to 92% and you hit the returns you're looking for. So again, it's more of a function of what are you willing to accept from a risk reward standpoint, and how comfortable do you feel in that? Otherwise, the math is so basic.
Got it. So I'm glad you said that, because I think sometimes we can get caught up into overcomplicating things. And what I always like to say, if you really know what you're doing, you should be able to explain to a 7-year-old what it is that you do, right? And I think sometimes this is a jargon that you see in the financial world too, right? Like, what is it that you're really doing for me? Can you just present it in a very simple terms, no jargon? So I think that's important, and I think the math helps with that. As far as what you're seeing, you said a simple math. You want to go a little bit about, because I think sometimes I get caught up in making the assumption that our listeners know what we're talking about, but essentially what you're talking about, Chris, in the multifamily space is you talked about vacancy for a second. You want to talk about what you're looking at as far as, really, is it just as how much are we acquiring the asset for, and how much is the asset generating an income by on a per unit rent basis? Is that what it is? Like, how would you summarize it? Maybe that was how I said it, but how would you summarize that?
So, when you're in the commercial real estate world, that term came from the word, real estate for commerce. So real estate as a business instead of residential real estate, which is real estate to reside in, basically. So the difference you have to understand is these buildings should have, years and years worth of financial records. So it'll tell you exactly what the property charged in rent, assuming the information is correct, exactly what they charged in rent for each unit and total, how occupied the building was. And I'll explain some of the stuff in a second, but, any other income sources it had, all the different expense items, what they've spent to improve the property and when, all tons of different stuff that will be available. And what we're basically doing is looking at the property and saying, hey, what can we do with this property? Can we make it better? Or is it as good as it can be for now? Is there anything wrong with the property that we have to fix that's going to become a bigger problem in the future? Is there anything that's, reached its lifetime, like the roofs that need to be replaced? And a lot of times what we'll do too is, even if the roof doesn't need to be replaced for 12 years, there's still some sort of discount associated that for every year the roof becomes older, because we know even if I don't have to replace it, either I'm going to hold it long enough that I'm going to, and it's going to cost me money that needs to be factored in, or even if I sell it before then, the next buyer is going to be thinking about that as well. So they're going to apply a discount for it. So the discount isn't going to be as heavy as if the roof needs to be replaced tomorrow, but there is some sort of discount factored in for those things, especially as buildings get older. So what we're really looking at in basic terms is, okay, the property is X today. What do we think the property will be in so many years? And is there anything we can do to the property to increase that? And then what we back into basically is, okay, how does that play out on both our income and the expense side? And what type of returns do we need to hit? How much money is required? How much of the property can we finance? And do we feel comfortable financing? So that's a mortgage, just like you would on a residential home. And, what do our investors look for? So, in terms of actual math, vacancy is a percentage. So you would multiply the total rent of all the units times, whatever the occupancy rate would be. So 100 minus whatever vacancy is. So if it was 5%, it'd be 95%.
Yeah.
A lot of your other, vacancy items for like concessions you give people, sometimes you give people a month off to move in to incentivize them to move in. And that would also be a percentage. So there you would multiply. You would add any additional income items. You would subtract out any expenses. And then, kind of your income after all your expenses and your mortgage, you would divide that by your total equity, which is, your total cost of the project minus your mortgage, to kind of get your percentage return.
Got it. That's really good. I like that you simplify that as you're going, and I think again the best thing people can do, and I would suggest too, is this looking at the financials and seeing, the gross operating income versus the gross potential, all that, and really seeing it. Because once you start looking at those, you'll get very familiar. And I don't want to take them through a math class, but I think it's good. It's good that we give some perspective. Now, there's a lot of moving pieces, obviously, and you mentioned commercial real estate. You mentioned you got a team, so kind of tell us where you get plugged in as an asset manager, because we hear property manager, right? We
Yeah.
hear, brokers, we hear syndicators,
Mhm.
but where do you fall in? How early in the process? How late? Can you give us an insight of what an asset manager actually is?
Mhm. So, I'll talk first about asset manager versus property manager, and then I'll talk a little bit more about where it plugs into the overall picture versus
Yep.
some of the other terms you just mentioned. Property manager primarily handles the day-to-day operations of the property. So that's collecting rent, showing vacant units, turning new units, overseeing general contractor stuff on a day-to-day basis. So, did someone show up in time? Did they do the work they need to do? Um, you know, Paying any expenses that are billed out, things like that. Then you'll have, if you're big enough, there's the on-site property management and there's also the corporate property management. They'll handle a little bit more of the bigger stuff. So the bookkeeping, they'll handle the hiring of your staff at the properties. They'll handle a lot of
Is
times
that, I'm
over.
sorry, is that on site, or is that, which one is that you
This is
refer to?
so within property management companies, there's the property management company, which is like the corporate office.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's the on-site staff at every property. So on our profit and loss statement, you'll actually see two line items going towards the employees. So you'll have a management fee, which
Mm-hmm.
is typically 3, 4, 5%, depending upon the size and how much rent it collects. And then you'll also see a line item for payroll. And the payroll is the people that work at your property 9 to 5. That's their full-time job. That's what they do. They're employed by the property management company, but the property itself pays them their salary and wages. So the on-site handles literally everything going on at the property day to day, all that stuff. The property management company will also handle, your bookkeeping, your overhead for payroll. They'll handle more of the contractor, subcontractor relationships. They'll help you bid out projects. They'll help you underwrite deals. They'll help you with weekly, monthly, quarterly reports, a lot of that stuff. The asset manager is, in a way manages the managers, but they're even more big picture. So they're coming up with the business plan overall, right? Where I was talking about, what do we think we can do with this property? They're the ones looking at what they can do, adjusting that plan if necessary, analyzing other properties. We do rent surveys. We analyze the financials way more than the property manager typically, because the way they look at it and the way the investors look at it will be slightly different. We're also the intermediary for a ton of different pieces. So, anything from the lender comes through us. Anything from insurance comes to us. Anything from the investors comes to us. Anything from the managers comes to us. We're kind of like the central hub for a lot of different pieces. But basically, we're setting more of the financial and big picture outcome for the property. We're also analyzing how long to hold the property, or when to sell. We're looking at different, factors in the market and the overall, country and worldwide, and just analyzing different things. So it's definitely much more big picture, from asset manager to property management, the company to the on-site staff. However, you did mention a couple other things that I want to clear up. You said, you mentioned syndicators as well. Syndicators can also be asset managers, and frequently they are. Very rarely do you have a syndicator that does not also asset manage. I only know of one example of hundreds, because it doesn't make sense not to. Technically, you don't have to. The act of syndication is really just raising money as a syndicate from investors. However, you then continue to operate the property. The same thing too, a syndicator can also have a property management company under the same umbrella or in-house. So it doesn't necessarily have to be a separate company. So a lot of these pieces can be in different entities, but a lot of them are interrelated.